Welcome to Egberto Off the Record, or I should say, welcome to Politics Done Right via Egberto Off the Record. Today, I'm honored once again to have somebody that we had on a few days ago with a new subject, a rather important subject that should give quite a bit of context. We have with us El Señor Pedro Senhorinha Silva. How are you doing today, my brother?
Hey, good man. It's always good to be in your energy, so it's cool. I'm feeling good.
Well, let me tell you something. You wrote an article called Bias by Us with the subtitle, let me get it, How Not Knowing That We Don't Know Causes Known Harm. And I think when you initially take a look at this, some people may not see what I call the gravity in such in your upbringing and reflects in reflection my upbringing. I want to read the first few sentences of your article, and then I want to expand. I want to expand on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Your article starts this way: Pedro, go back to Mexico. Pedro, go back to Mexico. Being black and growing up in the South between Virginia and Mississippi, with a name like Pedro Senorina Ramos Montero Silva, brought in many unwelcome experiences in my life. One of which was the othering that happened whenever I switched schools, which happened quite a bit due to the economic insecurity that we lived in. That's how you start your article. That's what brought me in because I came from Panama. Egberto, my first name, Willies, from my Caribbean roots. And that the same experience that you went through externally in America is what I went through. My internal experience with family was a bit different. So what I want to do is I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about that experience of culture in this country, sort of being stereotyped on what folks look like.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, when I was a kid, they used to joke me and tell me, go back to Mexico. And they would say, go back to Mexico. And where I grew up in Virginia and then part-time in Mississippi, back in those days, they didn't have like a lot of racial categories. So it's either black, white, or sometimes it would say other. And I identify as black, but the system that we're in, black people, they think that their names can't be Pedro Senhorinha Ramos Montero Silva. And so with that kind of name, they would say, well, what are you, some kind of Mexican? That's what they would say, some kind of Mexican. And I would say, well, I'm not Mexican. I'm black, but my dad is from this country. So they used to be, colonized by Portugal. So that's why I have this name. And I knew my history. I understood why I had this name. But there was no education around that. And so black people and white people would tell me, go back to Mexico. And it didn't help that at the time, there used to be a kids magazine called Boys Life. And the main character was a burro named Pedro. There was a Mexican burro. So because of that, it made it worse, because then the kids would just, kind of say, oh, you're a burro, you're a jackass, go back to Mexico. And so that was always a thing. And then because of the racial dynamics in the South, a lot of times people had, I hate that it's this way, but they have different categories, and some of those categories, was obviously black, white, and then they had colorism. So if somebody's lighter skin, they had their category. And then if you were considered a foreign person, then you were considered kind of like better than a black American. And a lot of foreign people bought into that too. And then black people also had a problem with it through our diaspora, because some, like, when I had every once in a while you'd meet like somebody from Dominican or something like that, and then they wouldn't want to be confused with a black American, so they would make those distinctions, but I never would. I would always say, no, I'm black. And so everybody had a tension around me, because if I would have said, oh, I'm other, then I think people would have had more acceptance of me. But because I kept saying I'm black, then it made them create more tension. And then it seemed as if people were like, oh, well, if you want to be black so bad, we're going to really make you feel the pain, and environmentally and socially. And it didn't help that I also had a white stepmom that had a blonde hair and blue eyes. So So I really was out of place in some instances, and that's why I have like a kind of deep awareness of the sensitivities that come with racial categories, ethnic categories, and nationality categories that people put themselves in, all trying to deal with this white supremacy adjacency and trying to kind of locate themselves on that false, this illusion, but they kind of base themselves on that spectrum. So that's basically where a lot of that tension is coming from and what I was talking about.
It's interesting because a lot of people look at, they look at you, they look at me, they look at, Black folks in the aggregate, and they just think monolithic, right?
Right.
I have never, I came from Panama, Central America, and I want to
I
give you
lived there
two
for a
quick.
little while.
Yeah, you've been there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I two experiences. One to the first college I went to, and the other to the university in Austin. At Blinn, I came there, and I remember walking at the campus and seeing a whole lot of Black cheerleaders, right? And that is the age when
Yeah.
you want to go ahead and meet ladies, etc. And I went up there, and I had a strong, strong accent, much stronger than I had now.
Mm-hmm.
And these young ladies laughed, right? I couldn't get an inch in because I was different. I looked
Mm-hmm.
like them, but I was
Mm-hmm.
different in the way I spoke.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the Latinas and the white girls had no problems in that they found it intriguing, right? First of all, there was this Black dude that Mexican Americans weren't used to seeing Black folks, even though there is a Black diaspora in
And
Mexico as
yeah.
well, that nobody talks about. But,
Right.
so it was quite interesting. So that was my introduction into America and colorism and culturism, all that sort of stuff. But the one that made the indelible impression is when I went to UT. And at UT, I joined a lot of organizations, including the Afro-American Culture Committee.
Mm.
And I went there, and we were listening to Martin Luther King's speeches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I told them, I said, I would like to hear some stuff from Malcolm X as well.
Mm.
Well, they were very anti-Malcolm X.
Mm.
And I explained to them, like, a few things about taking control of your own life and not giving not letting somebody cede you freedom, but
Mm-hmm.
freedom is something you take, not violence,
Mm-hmm.
something you take.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that I got was, you get out of here. You are an import. You are not one of us anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it gave me the opportunity to say, let's get some history here. I think the ship stopped in Jamaica and Panama before it got to the United States. Mm-hmm. We are all from the same diaspora, just different colonizers. Right. And, it was a point of education that that I think is still needed today, because right now, as it is, you still find that there is this chasm between Latino Blacks or African Blacks and African Americans, which I think needs to be dissolved.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been in that tension all of my life because my dad's country is now people considered a part of Africa, but it was actually islands that are off the coast quite a ways off of West Africa. But the older generation, they consider themselves Portuguese, and the younger generation consider themselves African. And so there was always this tension as well, because like my older brother who was born there, he would say, I'm African. And my older brother and older sister both grew up there till they were like 11 and 13. And so they have a different connection to the island. I've also been there, but I never lived there. But the tension of how one identifies when they come to America is also kind of interesting, because some people will warn people that are from another country, like, well, don't hang out with the Black people, because then you'll get Black Americans, because then you'll get treated like them, and so they'll try to avoid that because they want to just kind of make it in America, that sort of thing. But then eventually some people, it's their next generation, or maybe them, they'll end up having an experience that shows like, hey, you're not white. Like whatever you think, you want to distance yourself from Black Americans, you're still not white, and so that's an issue. But I'll tell you how silly it was back in my day was because I had a white stepmom, as I told you, I was never around her that much, but sometimes people saw me with her. And one day my principal calls me to the office, me and my girlfriend at the time. And I was like, why they call us to the office? Like, what did we do? And they were like, well, we have this form here that we need you to fill out. And we want to know how to identify you. And I was like, what do you mean? And then he said, well, the form only has Black or white. So I wanted to know what I should put down for you. And I was like, I started laughing. I said, what do you mean, man? And my girlfriend, she was half Korean and half Black. And
Uh-huh.
I said, what do you think that you should put down for me? And then he was like, Black? And like he said like that. I'm like, of course. Like, what in the world, man? What are you thinking? And then he was just like, I'm not sure, because there was so little understanding. And he didn't know if
Mhm.
my stepmom was my real mom. And he knew my dad was from another country. So he was like, I don't know what to put this guy in, but clearly I'm Black. But it's like, but their brains are like so unaccustomed to that kind of nuance in identities that, I mean, it's way better now in the sense that there's a bunch of categories that people can put in. So I'm not way better mentally, but there's a bunch of categories. But at the time it was Black, white, or other. And sometimes it was just Black or white on forms.
Yeah, I mean, it is so sad because I mean, the fact I got a call into my show 2 days ago where this young lady called in. She's from Nigeria and she was moving here when she was, I guess, 8, 9, or 10, somewhere around there. And when they were filling out the immigration forms, she had to put her race, and then the guy said, "Are you Black, white, or whatever they're asking her?" And this girl from Nigeria, a Black girl, just didn't understand what skin color had to do with them entering the country. What that kind of categorization
Mm-hmm.
really, it is a silly thing that folks don't understand, was really made to divide people, specifically after the the
Yep.
Bacon
Yep. Bacon
Rebellion,
Rebellion.
right?
Yep.
Because it is a silly thing. But there's something that you mentioned that I think that should be explored as well. How often um, foreign Blacks are used as a buffer, as a manner to
Mm-hmm.
create a chasm between African Americans and Blacks from outside the
Yep.
country, simply to have more discrimination against the Black Americans by saying,
Yeah.
but look, Pedro is here.
Right.
Look, Egberto is here.
Right.
And it has actually created a friction between the Black community, whatever there is in the Black community proper, right?
Right.
Because it is like, well, you think you are better, or they treat you better, or
Right.
whatever. And too often, Caribbean Blacks, Latino Blacks, African Blacks allow themselves to be used in
Yep.
that manner at
Yep.
the expense of our African American brothers and sisters, when the fact is that the African American brothers or sisters were the leaders in
Right.
getting the revolution in America and elsewhere. So when I hear those things on TikTok, I always put myself in there and first of all, give great regards to my African American brothers and sisters, because
Mm-hmm.
many a times I say, thank you. If you
Yep.
all didn't put the fight up, I
Right.
would not be here in America.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's true for everybody. And even like my dad and I had a lot of tension about that. Because even though my dad was, you know, in skin color brown, his dad could pass for white, but his mom was like African.
Right,
And so he was like a Trevor Noah, and
right.
he his driver's license said white, even though
Your
he
dad's?
doesn't. My dad's driver's license said white, because when in Mississippi, when he moved there, it was Black or white.
Okay,
And
yeah.
if you were from certain countries, they put you in white category. And because Cape Verde belonged to Portugal, my dad was under Portuguese. So then
Right.
Portugal automatically meant white,
White. Yeah.
even though my dad didn't look white at all. And
Right.
and when I was filling out my driver's license, I saw my dad looking over my shoulder, and I put Black, and he was like, "I knew you were going to put that." And I was like, well, what do you think I'm going to put? And he said, well, mine says white. And I said, well, first of all, you're not white. And second of all, I sure as heck am not white. And then he said, but he tried to like make an excuse for it, you know? And then I said, okay, Dad, the next time a police officer looks at me and says, hey, I bet that guy's dad's driver's license says white. And I was like, then I'll put it on my driver's license. I said, but I think instead he's going to call me, blank word, you know? And
Right.
then my dad was like, oh, you're stupid. You playing games all the time. but it was like, he had kind of bought into that idea because he wanted to just kind of, succeed in America.
And it is amazing because do you blame somebody who wants to succeed and they take advantage of whatever they can? I mean, everybody does it, right? Whether you do it from a racial standpoint, a religious standpoint, or otherwise, in the society as an aggregate, I can understand one doing it, right? I wouldn't do it, but I can understand those who choose to do it, right?
Right.
But when they're within a community or whatever, let that be for technical reasons, not for your actual living reasons, right? I mean, if I had somebody that said, "Well, I went ahead and passed because I wanted to get XYZ job, make more money, etc." Fine, but then when you come into the communities or whatever community, you are who you really are. Hey, that's fine. You beat this. You beat a corrupt system that uses false races to do things anyway. So you can't argue with that, right?
Yeah. Well, me, I don't know because I I was a pastor and I was like a super Christian person for a long time, and I had this real thing inside of myself about like I want to be. If I'm gonna show up in this position, I'm like I'm gonna be 100% me, and all my complexities, all my nuances. If your brain is so freaking lazy that you can't stretch it to understand who I am, then just don't be around me. Like that's my kind of thing.
And I respect that. I
Yeah,
honestly respect that,
yeah,
and that is how I am, right?
right.
But like I said, though, I give grace to
Yeah, I
those
understand.
who do otherwise, and at the same time, though, know the reality and act the reality when they're out of that space.
Yeah, and there's a few people in history who have done that in service, like they've used that ability to pass to then
Mhm.
funnel money to the civil rights movement and different things like
Right,
that. So I kind of understand the strategy behind it. Um, if it was used in that kind of strategic way.
right.
And at the same time, I feel like, at least at this stage in my own journey, I feel like those of us who like let's say for example with myself, and I think I mentioned it in the thing I wrote, that like it's almost like I had a get out of black free card. Like I could have
Hmm.
gotten out of some of the stuff that other black people dealt with in my community, but I wouldn't take the get out of
Right,
black free card because I felt like if I took it, I was justifying the system that was full of crap anyway. You know what I
exactly.
mean? So I
And
was
no,
like,
no, I mean, point taken. Very great point taken. Now, like I said, for me, it's a matter of giving others grace. It's
yeah,
something
yeah,
that I couldn't do. Right.
right,
I mean, you see how I reacted to the Afro American Culture Committee. I didn't
yeah,
leave the room when they told me to get out. I
right,
fought back, and I
right.
gave,
Exactly.
and all around. I mean, I had when I went to Blinn College and there's a woman who really took a motherly liking for me. A
Mhm,
white woman who was I worked in the cafeteria, and while a lot of the women in the cafeteria were trying to get me to go out with their daughters and that sort of stuff, she almost clamped me down and don't do this, don't do that, don't, trying to keep me away from. Of
mhm,
course, I still did it anyway, but
mhm.
you can see the complexities in the
Yeah.
way folks think. They give themselves permission to like you
Mhm.
because you are, because you're not from here, and that
Yeah.
makes them feel, after all, I'm okay
Yeah.
because look, I'm with Pedro.
Right. Exactly. And it's like there's like a lot of guilt comes up for a lot of people, like white people, especially people who have a history of being in America, about how America, like people know, like people act like they don't know. They know how America was formed and the basis that these relationships were created around. So they know it. But when they get around somebody like me or you, they get curious about us because of our names or whatever.
Mhm.
And so there's ends up being an opening, and then they might get to know us a little bit, but they don't afford that same curiosity to other Black Americans. They'll just be like, okay, well, that person's name sounds like a Black person from, back in the day. My biases are up. When they hear something that makes them curious, that's why I said, like, what if the opposite of bias is wonder or curiosity and
I
not
love that in the
neutrality?
let me stop you there because I want folks on Substack to go check out Pedro Senhorinha Silva's article, Biased by Us.
Yeah.
How not knowing in fact, I title our talk here by the title you give it. It's an in-depth article that I think kind of gives a lot of perspective. We're talking about it some here, but please go to Pedro's article and at the same time, go ahead and give Pedro a subscribe because these are the kinds of voices that we need to hear on Substack. There's a lot of these big names coming on to Substack over the last few months that are just bringing your standard. This is an in-depth type of thinking that we get from the brother here, El Señor Pedro Silva. Continue, Pedro, please.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think, like, just leveraging off of the word bias, right? So a lot of people, even with the word bias, they don't like hearing the word bias because it triggers them like they should feel guilty or shame or
Right.
something like that. And bias is a term that really means a preference or a prejudice for something. It could be a race, it could be whatever. But when people have biases, like you say, this is an example I should use when I was working with the Smithsonian bias exhibit. That's why I wrote this article. I was a docent for the Smithsonian bias exhibit. But people have biases. Like, say you're getting a massage, right? And somebody's massaging you like really tough. Some people like that. That's a bias. That's a preference. Some other people like it gently. And that's also a preference. That also falls in the category of bias. But when we look at biases only means bad person, that bias against the word bias makes us avoid learning how bias actually functions in our brains. And as I was talking about in the previous call we had, that the way the brain functions, we have our amygdala, which is our fight or flight response, which it gets fully developed before you're even born. So you have this piece of your brain that's already developed and wired for survival. You come into the world and your family and everybody tells you, this is how you survive. This is how you don't die. And you get full of that information. So somebody says, Black people will kill you. This is this, and then they get programmed, right? Well, their prefrontal cortex takes 27 years almost to develop. So if you have your amygdala programmed with all these fear messages, which we get from all over the place, from the moment you're born, that thing's already fully functioning. So it's taking in all this data. Then the other part of your brain, another part of your brain is called the hippocampus. That's like kind of like a filing system. So if you have counter experiences to what you've been taught, like if you do things like bridging and stuff like that, you'll put in your filing system, oh, I know I was told this about, Black people, let's say, but I've had experiences of other Black people that doesn't match. Then your prefrontal cortex can take that data and say, evaluate it. That does your executive function. So then you can make decisions that contradict what your amygdala tries to tell you. If you don't have any of those experiences, then your prefrontal cortex is only going to use the same limited amount of information if your hippocampus doesn't have more experiences. So it's like the more experiences you have, the more books you read, the more movies you watch, the more things you do with things that are different than your own baseline, the more you're able to develop your prefrontal cortex and make better relational decisions. But many people are in these silos, so they just have the same information on repeat, so they can't expand their relational baseline. So then they only can be around people that are like the people they survived with when they were younger. And when the world is way bigger and there's a lot more relational flexibility than we get to take advantage of because we're programmed, by these biases.
That is why a lot of the work that we do is important, right? Expanding, first of all, being able to, like I tell folks, one of the reasons I work with absolutely everybody, whether you call yourself MAGA, whether you call yourself even racist, whether you call yourself whatever, I'll always work with you because, again, one of the reasons you just mentioned is when you have the experiences. And I can tell you from a flawed person that I am from a country where, a homophobia type country. I am from a sexist country. And I can tell you without regards, right, without any, absolutely, that I'm no longer a sexist, that I'm no longer a homophobe, because I did just what you mentioned there.
Yep.
First of all, I was introduced to exposing myself to reality and how things really are.
Right.
And I mean, I won't lie to you. I mean, this amygdala always wants to get in when the executive gets lazy.
Yes,
But then
exactly.
when the executive part of your brain gets lazy, a word may come out and it's like, did I really say that?
Right.
And but you know it's wrong. You correct yourself. And because from the heart level, you've changed. And if I
Hmm.
can change from being a sexist, if I can change from being a homophobe, if I can bring down all those negatives that were into my amygdala because of how I was reared, because of my culture,
Hmm.
everybody that's listening to us here, whether you're a racist that have not accepted that you're a racist, whether you're a sexist that haven't accepted you're a sexist, whether you're a homophobe that haven't accepted you're a homophobe, just look in the mirror and says, release myself. It is
Hmm.
possible. I did.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it's like, I mean, I was raised with so many things, and like I was a fundamentalist evangelical Christian that thought everybody was going to hell except for 144,000 people. So I like, if I could come from that, and then, well, on top of everything else, the world is huge, and we miss out on so much of
Yes.
it because we take this information that we receive from people that were well meaning, because they wanted you to survive, and one of the jokes I made when in the bias exhibit is that we have a bias for survival. So if most people prefer to be alive, so they're going to look for the information that they think is going to prolong their life, and
Right.
that makes us um have less capability of engaging with people who we might perceive as a threat. So if a person hears a person with an accent or speaking another language, the reason why that's a threat to them, because you could be saying in another language, "I want to kill you," but they don't
Right.
know that, so their brain starts tripping. One of the things I used to do, I've done a lot of goofy things when I started realizing how trapped some people are. I would sometimes go in the mall, and if I saw somebody looking at me like kind of funny, want to follow me around or something, because they didn't know my name was Pedro yet, so they still were using their normal racist biases against me. I would make up a fake sounding language just to make the person feel uncomfortable. And I would do it with my brother. I have a brother that's adopted, so he doesn't have the Portuguese background. He's a Black American, and he when we would go to the mall, and then somebody might look at both of us, and then I'd be like, "Oka, mole mo kali si makadi, oka mo do papa," and I just point at the person and just do like that, and then he would go, "Oka le, omokoti, oka puta," and then we would just keep doing it, and then people look like, "Oh my god, what are they saying?" And then we just walk off and crack up laughing. And I would do that because I wanted people to see how silly they were. And one time in the same mall, because we used to go to this one mall, everybody hung out. Is one time this older white lady grabbed her purse, and like she thought I was gonna steal it. Well, in the mall, and I wasn't doing anything there. I looked at her, I grabbed my bag and held it the same way she was holding her purse, and then I
Hmm.
pointed at her and screamed and said, "No, leave me alone!" And then I started running. And then my brother was like, "What's going on?" And some of my friends, and then I said, "That white lady's trying to rob me. That old white lady's trying to rob me." And they were like, "Man, you are insane, bro." But I was like, "You need to see how you look, because you're sitting
I
here projecting."
Yes, yeah. I think, believe it or not, that last one that you did with the purse, that is, man, I may even do that, because I remember when I just moved to Kingwood and I'm walking through we have all these trails, and I'm walking through the trail and I pass this woman and does the same thing she did with her purse. But, I never let things go. So I turned around and I said, it's not me that you need to fear. It's the
Mhm.
one that you least believe you need to fear that you will need to fear. I want to write something here from Natalie Lago says, I had the same experience with my daughter in elementary school. My daughter is half Black from me, her mom, and half Danish from her dad. I refused to fill out the form. the school informed me that it would assign someone to look at her and evaluate her category. To make this matter more complicated, although my husband is Danish, his family officially changed their surname to Lago. I can see why, Natalie. Wow. And then Jane B says, yes, the African Americans were huge in the revolution, and it's disturbing that he says at others, such as the Smithsonian, are removing the history. It makes me angry. That's what Donald Trump is doing at the Smithsonian
Yeah.
right now. They're trying to take things out. And Catherine Hill says, wow, just tuned in and very glad to hear both of you. Thank you, Catherine, for being here. Folks, please remember to share. Well, look, we're coming up on our time now, El Senor. I wanted to talk this issue, and I think we got to a bit more than I expected us to get to it, the context that you gave the article. I want to remind everybody that we're speaking to Pedro Senhorinha Silva about his article titled Bias by Us, subtitle, How Not Knowing That We Don't Know Causes Known Harm. Please find that article. Please read that article. And while you're there, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. He writes some great pieces that I enjoy reading, and I think you will enjoy reading as well. There are a lot of good substantive writers here on Substack. Let us be known. Point it out, because again, a lot of right now we're being overtaken by a lot of the stars from mainstream media.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing that they do all the times. But if you want some in-depth, real-world writing, please remember to visit people like Pedro and myself. We're out there doing the work. Pedro, give me a closer.
Yeah, I would say that the greatest gift that you can experience in this life is getting to know yourself. And you can't do that if you are allowing yourself to be limited by biases that maybe were meant to make you feel safe, but they're actually keeping you from you. And when we don't know that we don't know, as I said, we create known harm. When we are not aware of the relational limitations we have, we project our limitations onto other people. And there's just so much for us to gain by allowing ourselves to experience the fullness of this life, to expand our relational and imaginative capacities, and to help create a world where more people can thrive. And that's the work that I'm going towards pretty much with everything I'm doing. And whatever has to be dismantled, let it be dismantled, so that we can build something better.
Pedro, Senhorinha Silva, it is always my honor to speak to you, and we must do this more often because, like I said, every time I speak to you, I leave a little bit smarter. Have a wonderful rest of your day, my brother.
Hey, same to you, man. Prazer.